Hey, what's up to everybody out there? Welcome to another edition of the Round Table Talk. I am your host, C Money, and in today's episode, we're gonna kind of do a little follow up on an episode I just did, the last episode I did, but we're not gonna do a follow up. We're gonna talk about a topic that's kind of relating to it. As you know, the last episode I did an episode about the assassination of Charlie Kirk and everything on that, and with that in mind, with that assassination down here in South Florida, a school teacher at a private school was released of their duties, meaning terminated or fired, however you want it, because of his bad comments or his comments that he posts on social media. And of course, a commissioner for one of the cities down here in South Florida um got backlash because of their comments against Charlie Kirk. And there now is um trying to get the city commissioner to resign from his position as a city commissioner, and there's a lot of people, including city officials as well as the residents of the city, that are very outraged with their comments. And with that in mind, today's topic is freedom of speech. Do we have it or do we not? Now, America is supposed to be the land of freedom of speech, meaning that we all have the power, not the power, but we all have the right to express our opinions, which is ergo freedom of speech. But at what cost does it plays in us having freedom of speech? As you know, with the Charlie Kirk incident, a lot of HBCUs have been targeted because they feel like they are affiliated with his assassination and things like that. And the school that the teacher worked at had to cancel classes the next day, which I believe was on a Friday, and then all activities for the weekend was canceled because of his outburst. And I'm looking at it as if this is just one person expressing their opinions and things like that online. I know with a lot of people, it's not okay to express certain opinions. You know how a lot of people, they'll say something about President Donald Trump, or they'll say something about the president or any president of that nature, or any elected official, and then next thing you know, they're knocking on your door saying, hey, we're going to have to arrest you or anything because of the negative comments you're saying. And I look at it as if, do we really have freedom of speech? I know a lot of these comments that people say should not be said, because some of them are very, very disrespectful. We have a right to express our minds. Just like when I told you about my show here, a lot of the things that I say, some of them are my opinions and my views on a lot of the things that are out there. And I don't knock people if they agree or disagree, or they are neutral on the opinions and on outtakes of situations. I tell people all the time, you don't have to agree with me, you don't have to disagree with me, you don't have to like what I say, you don't have to dislike what I say. It's just, I'm a content creator, I'm a YouTube channel personnel. So for me, it's like things that I say, that regardless if it's politics, the government, everyday life, whatever, it's how I see things and how I feel about these things. Just like today's episode, I feel basically we don't have the right of freedom of speech, because a lot of these people who express themselves, because remember back then, we didn't have, social media with Facebook or X, or a lot of these social media platforms to express ourselves. We only express ourselves if we was at a community event, or we ran into the news and we express ourselves, or we express ourselves through our friends, by word of mouth. We never had, back then in the 80s and 90s, we didn't never have social media or Facebook to talk about and express our feelings. Now there's a lot of people that Because back then, when we expressed our feelings about political incidents or events that happen in our modern day society, we only talked about it through our friends. We only talked about, oh, we did, through our friends and stuff like that. Now we have social media platforms to where we can express our opinions to millions and thousands of people, because how many people are going to see your post on Facebook and Twitter, which is which is X now, and Instagram, and TikTok, and all of these other platforms where we can post. How many people are going to see it? Because I know there's thousands of millions of people that are on X, and the Trump tweets on X, and a lot of these political people tweets on X and stuff like that. So now we know that it is and the fact that we say something as humans, it'll get us in jail for years, because we express our opinions or our minds. Some of it may be disrespectful, some of it may be clean posts. We may express ourselves about how we feel about certain things, but they come knocking on our door in the next few hours. Hey, you post something on there, and now you're going to. And I look at it as if the man posted something, the commissioner posted something. Now, as a commissioner, I understand that you have to uphold yourself as a city commissioner. So, things that you post online, you gotta carefully choose the words that you post. So with that in mind, I understand certain things, but at the same time, you have to realize we are Americans. A lot of these people here are just expressing their opinions about what they feel. Yeah, because in my back of my mind, yeah, a lot of this stuff, I have a lot of things that I want to say about a lot of things, but we as people, we like, this is how I feel about this situation, but I don't want to post it, because then everybody's going to be coming for me, and then all the people and all of this and all of that's going to happen. Because he's a school teacher, I get that they feel because he's a school teacher, he has to have, there are rules and regulations on what to post on social media. You can't post certain things that oppose political views, because a lot of these parents and a lot of these other staff members, and a lot of these city officials, or a lot of these people who support their school, or whatever the case may be, they may find your comments a little bit disrespectful. So I get it. As a teacher, you can't go on that's like going on Facebook and say, oh, I'm a teacher, but I hate kids, they disgust me and all that. But you're a teacher. A lot of people are going to find that disrespectful, and then next thing you know, you're out of a job. It's the same way with city commissioners. You may say, I'm a city commissioner, but I don't like the people in my city because they're nasty, rude, and disgusting, and I wish we would get new people moving into our city, and let's try to kick out the old people. A lot of people look at you and say, are you serious? And some of these people grew up in this city, or whatever the case may be. And now it comes down to it that we understand that may be wrong. But if they was to say something like, okay, I think what Charlie Kirk is doing may not be right, but but he has choose your words wisely. And for me, I feel like we do have a right to freedom of speech. I can say what I want to say about the president, or I can say what I want to say about the governor, or this person or that person or whatever, and I shouldn't have to be chastised or ridiculed, or I shouldn't have to be arrested and locked up because of my political views. And a lot of these people, they're scared to come out. I was having a conversation last night with somebody with me and said, oh yeah, the world is corrupted, the whole United States is corrupted, the world is corrupted, and stuff like that. And I was saying, and I was telling them, I was like, yes, we have the right for freedom of speech, but it is hard for us to express our freedom of speech, because the slightest thing we say could land us in deep trouble. You see, the city commission, they're trying to get him terminated. He did went online and apologize for his comments and stuff like that. But they feel like, no, we still want you to fire. We want you to resign because we don't want you here. We don't want your bad political comments or whatever it was, and we don't want it. And just the same with the teacher. They probably sat him down and said, we can't allow teachers here in our school to talk disrespect political views, because you may have a couple of parents that might like Charlie Kirk or support Charlie Kirk, and then by you saying the things that you're saying, they're probably going to say, I don't want my kid in the class, or I'm going to remove my kid from the school because you have a person who disagrees with a political activist and stuff like that. So they'll feel like, okay, look, you can't be saying a lot of these things. Now, I would do this. I would tell, people, and we don't think about this when we get hired in school, when we get hired as teachers and things like that. A lot of these people, they should let them know, hey, as a teacher, you should know that you must choose what you say online wisely. You can't post obscene nudities and stuff like that, because, of course, X, just like other platforms, it is going bad. So what it is that basically we have to know, and we have to make sure that a lot of this, that we can have a freedom of speech, that we can, have it to where we can speak our minds, we can speak what we can speak, we can do these type of things, or we can have these, mind settings of, hey, I am this type of person, this is me, this is who I am. I want to have a freedom of speech. I want to express myself with everything, because I am a human being who has the right to express myself. And America is looking like, no, you don't. But it's in our Constitution. We have the right of freedom of speech. I'm guessing it's not Constitution. But I don't think that. Okay, I don't think. Yes, what do I think about that? If you've heard about it, it's probably all over the news, where a city commissioner and a teacher from down here in South Florida. If you're not, look it up. But do I think they should have got fired? Yes and no. Do I think he should step down? Yes and no. Because for a city commissioner, you have to uphold a standard. And your standard is, you got to know that this is something that you are a city commissioner. You are upholding, you're the backbone of the community. You're the one that's supposed to make sure that this city is straight, your things like that or whatever. You're like an assistant to a mayor, and you got to make sure that you don't have citizens that hate you, because you could go out there and say things, and a lot of these people, because they had a meeting about it, and they had the meeting, and a lot of the citizens and a lot of the residents of his city was, they didn't like what he said, regardless if they agree with him or not. You are a city commissioner. You're supposed to choose what you say wisely. Whether your comments is good, whether your comments are bad, you have to think about what to say before you get online. Like a lot of the times I come on here and I say things, and it may be things that people may not like for me to say, or maybe people that think that may disagree with me. But I'm not a city commissioner. I'm not a mayor. I'm not a president. I'm not a big time multi-million-dollar company personnel. Just like when the owner of Papa John's came out and said had the racist, comment, and not racist, but the comment that he said, and Paula Dean, when she used the N-word, and then you haven't seen Paula Dean afterwards, and then the man from Papa John's, when I was just talking about, you don't see him doing commercials no more. It's mostly Shaq, because Shaq is part owner of Papa John's, and a lot of these people, when they do these things, they get. Now I believe the man from Papa John's still owns Papa John, and he still has a part of Papa John's. It's just he's not the face of Papa John's no more, because now you done said things that gonna make people, because a lot of places was gonna pull Papa John's from, from stadium venues to places, and people was gonna stop eating from Papa John's. It was gonna lost a lot, but to get away with it, Shaq stepped up. Hey, I'm going to be the Papa. He started doing Papa John commercials, and he bought out a percentage of Papa John's. And it became what Papa John's was still safe, because I feel, this is what things is happening, and we have to realize that, you know, we gotta understand a lot of this stuff, to where, hey, let's get this stuff, let's make sure that, hey, we got to choose our things wisely. We got to choose everything wisely. We got to make sure that a lot of this stuff is basically, you know, out of here. We got to make sure that we have the right to express ourselves. We can't. We got to choose things wisely, and we got to make sure that we don't say nothing that jeopardizes us. See, I'm just a regular person. Yes, I do content creators here on YouTube and things like that. But at the same time, I look at it as if, I don't jeopardize myself, by saying certain things. Because, the FBI, they watches almost everything. There talks about how, they're watching every call, how they can bug, how, that's why, they call it Metro PCS, even though it's now Metro by T-Mobile, because they say they monitor everybody calls and stuff like that. I honestly believe that the government watches everything. There's a person, I guarantee you right now, there's a person that is paid almost $50,000 to $60,000 a year in the government or the FBI or the CSI, who sits there and watches YouTube. All they do, they clock into work, they get on their computer, and they watch every post from YouTube, X, Instagram, from a lot of these social media platforms, just to see if anybody is making threats. And I'm quite sure there are police stations and police officers and police departments that have one person that is they did a TV show about it, CSI Cyber, where it started. It was starring Bow Wow and I believe Ted Denson and a couple other people, where it was a show about cyber attacks and computer things that happen on the internet and computers and stuff like that. And I believe that these police departments have a person that's a cyber person or information technology personnel that's not trained as a police officer, but is one of them people that sit at the desk and they go through social media. Because a lot of these criminals, they post social media where you see they be posting guns and posting posts or threats to these schools and stuff like that you be seeing. So a lot of them, they sit up here and they have somebody that, and yes, they do have a person, because I've seen where people criticize presidents and criticize, government officials and stuff, and then the next day the FBI knocking at their door and they're getting arrested because they're negative comments on social media. And I'm like, is this what freedom of speech relates to? We can't talk about, and I understand you're not gonna sit online and say, oh, I'm gonna kill the president, or I'm gonna kill the governor, I'm gonna kill this person. Yeah, we know that's a threat, so we know that you're going to jail for that. But if you sit up here and say, I don't like what the president's doing with this and this, I believe that he's a bad person for doing this and doing this and doing this, and next thing you know, you get a knock on your door. We're here because of your negative comments on the president. And I'm like, it's not a threat to the president. It's just my freedom of speech to say I don't like the fact that he's doing things. There's several things I've talked about in my previous episodes about, I don't like what, a lot of these officials doing, from the governor to city commissioners, even to the president and things like that. I done gave my views and everything, and stuff like that. And then, my friend I was talking to yesterday, and we was like, these people, they elect these people and they don't want to make changes about it. I say, people won't change, but the only thing is, and I look at this and I say, this is terrible, because I get a lot of people that are saying, oh, I'm not going out there to vote because my vote ain't gonna count. But I look at it and say your vote does count. Just because you don't vote, that doesn't mean your vote doesn't count. Because we're one step closer to making change. A lot of these, Democrats and a lot of these people out here, they don't vote because they feel like every time I vote, nothing changes. But your vote does matter when it comes to certain things, because you have to realize. Let's say you're running for city commissioner, or you're running for a councilman or something like that, and then you say, oh, I'm going to make sure that these parks are safer. I'm going to make sure that we have cleaner parks. I'm make sure that we have healthier foods in schools. When you say things in your campaigns, you have to make sure when you get elected that those things happen. You can't say, oh, I'm going to cut, you know, taxes in half, or I'm gonna cut this, or I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna make this a better place, this and that, this and that. When you get elected, you gotta make sure that that initiative happens. It may not happen overnight, but you gotta make sure. If you promise to make parks safer and clean up the parks, yeah, when you get elected, you gotta make sure you put a team together to say, let's make sure that we get these parks clean. If you have a problem to end violence in the neighborhood, hey, you gotta make sure, hey, let's get a team, neighborhood watch or something like that. Let's get a team together, so make sure that we don't, we stop violence in our communities and stuff like that. You gotta do things like that and keep promises. You can't make promises that you can't keep. You can't make promises in your campaign for stuff to get done and then turn around and it don't get done, because people are gonna start looking at you like, well, he said that we do, or she said she was gonna do this, but they're not doing this. So now we're wondering what's going on. So it comes down to it that we have to understand a lot of these things that are happening now, because we don't have freedom of speech. We'd say a lot of the things back then. People protest and people marched. We talked about what we had, word of mouth. Even though people protest and march now, and back then that's all we could have did was protest and march. Now you have social media where not only can you protest and march, but you can spread the word to other people to join. Because let's say you're gonna start a protest, about a lot of the stuff that's happening right now, and you're only telling your friends and people around you. You can go on social media and say, hey, because there are many times that I've seen on social media where it say, tomorrow we're having a town hall protest in the front of the city hall to protest, saying the end of this and this and this. If you care to join us, come at 6:30, blah, blah, blah. And there's been a lot of protests where, they go to social media and to invite not only people they know, but other people as well. Because how many people retweets and share them posts and everything to repost a lot of those posts about these things. And that's the community getting together for their own freedom of speech. But look how many freedom of speech is getting torn down. You have protesters and stuff that get torn up, even when people are protesting peacefully. A lot of these protests, we don't want them out here protesting, so let's tear it up. They're just protesting peacefully. It's not like they're rioting. It's not like they're shooting or violently, blowing up cars or setting things on fire. They're just out here protesting for their rights. But you but you don't want them to protest because you feel like, it's wrong. It's injustice. You feel like it's bad for them to do it. But we're only doing what the Constitution allows us, of freedom of speech. I can go outside right now and I can say, things that I want to say, and then next thing you know, a policeman's gonna come and say, hey, you can't say stuff like that, But I can look at them and say, I have the right as an American citizen to have freedom of speech. If that's the case, then you need to change the laws and things like that. And when you do, you're going to have a lot of people that's going to be hated, because as an American citizen, we all have a right to freedom of speech. But at the same time, choose your words right. Choose your words wisely, because I feel like, yes, we do have the right to freedom of speech, but at the same time, choose what you say, because what you say could affect other things. But I feel like, because of this situation, it's bringing out a lot around it. You're getting HBCU schools being threatened, and they had nothing to do with it. They just trying to target them because they feel like they had something to do with it. You getting, a lot of these people that are expressing their opinions, and now they're getting, fired, or they getting threatened, or things like that. You got to realize a lot of these things is happening because they don't want us Americans to express our opinions. You know, yeah, rest in peace, Charlie Kirk. I never really knew of him, but I knew of him. I never really knew of him. I know he was a political activist, and he was about a lot of things. But at the same time, you got to realize he's no different than Martin Luther King. He's no different than Jesse Jackson or Al Sharpton or Cesar Chavez. A lot of these other people who was out here fighting. Not saying Cesar Chavez, but you know what I mean. A lot of these political activists that are out here that was fighting for things and you know trying to make America great, and things like that. Because I was saying to myself, and I was thinking, I said, if Martin Luther King would have been still alive today, if Malcolm X would have still been alive today, what is going on? You know, and now I know they are turning, and like a lot of people say, these people are turning in their grave. Yes, they're turning in their grave because look what we have. We are still here, even though we fought the battle and we won the battle. We still haven't won the war. The battle is a lot of the things that we have accomplished, from the Montgomery boycott, the segregation of schools, to a lot of this, the first black president, to a lot of this stuff. And then, like I tell people, a lot of these people don't know George Washington was not the first president of the United States. You do realize the first president was an African American, was a black president. But they don't put that because it's not set in stone. Now, a lot of you may argue to me about that, but look it up. But at the same time, we have won plenty of battles, but we still have not yet won the war, because there is still racism, there is still, injustice, there is no right to freedom of speech, because a lot of people who express their opinions, they are in jail, or they lose their jobs and stuff like that. You got a lot of people who are out here still shooting and killing, trying things like that. You got a lot of mass murderers, you got a lot of mass shootings, you got assassinations going on and things like that. It all started when Kennedy got assassinated, when Lincoln got shot and stuff like that. And I'm looking at it as if, what are we doing to make, I'm not going to quote Donald Trump, because I'm not going to say I was thinking about make America great again, but no. What are we doing to end all of this nonsense? I want to know what y'all think about this. Do you think that we as Americans have the right to freedom of speech? Do you think that we don't have the right of freedom of speech? Do you think that what is going on in America today is right, or do you think it's not right? Because to me, it's not right, because I look at it as if a lot of the stuff that's going on right now, and with the fact that it is a lot going on in America, it is hard for us to actually sit here and think that we are all safe. Nobody's safe. If you can get assassinated and you're not even a politician, but you can get assassinated at a college, we are not safe, because now everything is going to have to be buckled down. They're going to have more security at rallies, regardless if it's a political rally or a regular rally with somebody. They're going to have to tighten up security for mass, gatherings and stuff like that, that is political bound, or anything that has to do with politicians. Even if it's not a politician attending it, anything that has to do with politics, they're going to have to be, more tight security and everything. But honestly, I feel we don't have the right of freedom of speech, because everybody who has freedom of speech dead. Let me know what you think about this. Comment at the bottom of the page. Email me also, roundtable00@yahoo.com. I thank y'all for watching this. This is a follow-up to the Charlie Kirk situation. Rest in peace, Charlie Kirk. I am glad to say and happy to say they did catch the shooter, and there's a lot going on behind it, because they're still reporting stuff. We might do a follow-up on this story, we might not. I'm just giving you, my opinion with this, because right now I feel as if now we don't have a right of freedom of speech, because a lot of these people that are expressing their opinions about Charlie Kirk is now being fired, forced to be removed, released from their jobs and things like that. So let me know how you feel about this. Email me roundtable00@yahoo.com. Don't forget to comment at the bottom of this page. As always, stay safe, stay blessed, stay hydrated, and I will see you in the next episode. Take care.